little bit ahead schedule, which will be to the benefit of our next segment, which is an exciting fireside discussion with moderated with Dr. David Bothe, with Kristín Árnadóttir and Professor Antje Boetius. So when the time allows for it, please feel free, Dr. Bothe, Kristín and Professor Boetius.
Apologies for a small technical glitch. I was hoping to get a microphone, but we'll find this way. We're a bit ahead of schedule. Okay, so first of all, welcome to this Fireside talk. So obviously it was the first measure we did to decrease the carbon footprint of this whole event, just get rid of the fire, and so you just have to refer to an imaginary fire. But still we want to have it a kind of cozy talking atmosphere here, and talking about the our climate future, climate protection, energy transition, and economic prosperity, a challenge or an opportunity. And the idea of this talk is basically to fill a gap, because we had now this big political sphere, the big objectives, and we also have a lot of panels, already one this morning and others later today, on detailed technical solutions. And in between is this layer of society and economy where actually the transition has to happen, where basically the technology options have to be implemented in order to achieve the political goals. And at least my impression is over the last years that this is maybe the layer where the biggest hurdles are, where we risk to get stuck, that we are losing this momentum on this element. We know what the technologies are, we know what the options are we could use, and we know we have a clear formulated target. We just heard it again from the ministers, and we know where we want to get to. But somehow we haven't yet unleashed this potential and really get the momentum going. And I think talking about this would be the idea for me to use this talk for having maybe, I'm not sure if we can solve it in the next 40 minutes, but at least maybe we can collect some ideas. And I'm very happy to have two perfect experts for this here with me. First is Professor Dr. Antje Boetius. She's German polar and deep sea researcher and director of the Alfred Wegener-Institute. She studies the impact of climate change, biodiversity losses, and ocean health. And you're also a member of the National Academy of Science, Leopoldina. And what I found very interesting, you also collaborate with art, theater, and film, to the culture industry, with focus on the relationship between humanity and nature. So exactly this gap between society and the science. And we also have Kristín Árnadóttir. She is the Deputy CEO of Landsvirkjun, the national power company of Iceland. You're also the chairwoman, I guess, of the Federation of Energy and Utility Companies in Iceland. And what I also found very interesting, you have been for many years the Director General at the Environment Agency of Iceland for over 12 years, so also have looked at this from a official function role. So, thank you very much. And just to get us starting, I mean, I think we just heard the recommitment of the politicians, like there is a strong commitment to fighting climate change. Antje, you're working on it as an researcher. You can tell us more about this. If you reflect, if you see what is going on the political sphere, are you satisfied? Do you think like we are on the right track, or is there something else you would like us to do?
Well, okay, so I'm an Earth system scientist. That means that I get to talk about the apocalypse of not being on the right track. And that's, of course, an important part that we need as humans always when we have to make large decisions. We want to know, of course, what is in for us, but also we need that fear of a future that we don't want. That has always been that way. And the Minister of Iceland has mentioned that. You can always go on the wrong track, and then eventually you can go to the right track. The good thing is that the track we want to be on has been decided at the highest levels of all nations together, both for climate and biodiversity crisis, and if you want to expand it to the Sustainable Development Goals, also for the crises of hunger and security and children's education and women and all of that. So we have political negotiations, political goals, and the question now is, can the nations, as the ultimate governing body, can they do the right thing for their citizens, and where are they stuck? Where are they not doing the right thing? And then we have to see that for the ultimate goal that we have for climate, to stay much below 2 degrees, or at best, and some Icelandic politicians have fought that through as a Paris climate goal, stay best below 1.5 or reach 1.5 just shortly before we go to climate neutrality. That path we are not reaching to the best of scientific knowledge. We are diverting from it. We could still reach it with a gigantic effort, very costly, but it doesn't look great. And then, of course, we have to think apocalypse plus survival plus transformation all together. That's where we stand today.
Okay. Apocalypse are words which have a kind of
I mean, anyone who has seen the pictures of New York, has seen the flooding in Pakistan, has taken the stock of children that are in poverty again, that has increased, that to me is the word apocalypse.
Very good. Kristín, Mr. Habeck said like he's jealous on Iceland because it always feels like you are much more ahead than many other countries, particularly in Germany. But still, you still also have something to. Can you give us a quick summary? What do you think, where do you stand as a nation with regard to fulfilling your targets, and also what are the remaining construction sites?
Well, I think it's very important to start at the beginning. We are in a very fortunate place now, as the minister said. However, we did not reach that place just by sort of like, it did not accidentally happen. It was a political decision, and it was not a consensus decision either. So many people at that time thought, well, I think it's better to have oil. That is a very proven concept, you know, we know how it works, geothermal, you know, it's too hot or not too hot, and what is hot and what is low temperature, you know, the discussion here. So it was not a decision that was taken very quietly or lightly. We tell the success stories now, but I think it's also important that we tell the story. It was not very simple. You know, we have wells that did not succeed, you know, didn't give us the warm water. Some wells are just like almost looked at as a natural phenomenon because they something happened and they may be blown up or something like that. But you have to look at it that way. We are in this place because we made decision, we made some mistakes, we put money into it, and we were very courageous, because the easy part then, to be very sure of what you are doing, would have to be to taking oil or coal or keeping on the same path as everybody else. But today we are in a very fortunate position. However, like 85% of our primary energy is then green, but we have 15% left. The government has made a very clear goal. We want to be taking out fossil fuel by 2040. And that means road transport. That means our fishery industry. So if you just talk about the roads, as you all know, Iceland is a rather large country with very few inhabitants, and we live around the country, so we have to travel. So rails are not very, we are not enough of us there yet. We are still trying to make more babies. But we need to be very realistic of how we're going to do this, and there we will need social acceptance, as same as here. So we also, as Icelanders, need to be watch out for the the danger of thinking about the past and we've done so great and not thinking that we have a very steep hill ahead of us, because it is a hill also for us.
Just briefly comment on that. I find it very important that you always tell the story of energy in your nation, in a country. When we forget it in Germany often, but when you go back to literature and facts about the electrification, so I come from Darmstadt, Frankfurt, where the first city that got electrified, and you read texts about electrification as if it was something from hell, from the devil, and all of the damage people could take, and the immense first investment that someone had to shoulder. And we forgot all about that. So I find it very, very good that you tell the story, how easy it is as humans. You decide for one path, you take the risk, and then you are rewarded or you fail. And we just have to understand the path we're on is now that it was good for some time, but now it leads to ultimate failure. But what we also know about humans is so hard to make us change one path for another, especially when it's about cheap energy. And that's the key thing we'll have to solve, that problem of transformation activation. And the first panel this morning said it very clearly, communication and clarity and education in it, but also investing in a big PR machine that must ultimately be bigger than that of fossil fuel industry, and that is tough. That is what is needed, and it's not there yet.
And I think that's a very reassuring message as well for us in Germany, that we see that others have had the same discussions and the public opposition on their developments, but that we now have a case as a good example of what the benefits could be if you endure these kind of discussions and and take the courage and do the decisions. And I think if I could have, when I see these Icelandic cases, I think it's often so reduced of, it's this odd country in the north who happens to have so much energy, and it's so easy for them. But I think you cannot spread the word often enough, like how difficult it was for you to get there. And if there's, I don't know if there's a lesson learned or something you can share with us also, how you managed to handle these kind of discussion and to get this momentum, then obviously that would be something we would be very eager to learn from you as well.
Yeah, but I think in that you need to think about the spirit of the nation when we were taking these decisions. We were a relatively newly independent nation, so independence meant a lot for us. And during the oil crisis, you could see that that was a real hindrance to our independence. So I think that played into our sort of like national pride also, that we wanted to achieve that. And that brings us to the importance of sort of like gaining the momentum and reading the room, reading the nation, and tapping into what they want and also showing them the path. Because that was the path towards this energy system that we have today. So there is no simple solution. However, if we look at it from today's perspective, we got there by gaining knowledge, believing in science, but also sort of like realizing that we will not finalize it, all of it at once, and having the courage to do it. But I think that this independence issue was a strong driver also for us.
When I visit Iceland, and I do that quite often, I'm always amazed how many people know each other. So I had the luck to travel also with both presidents, the president of Germany and of Iceland. And so you go everywhere, and then small kids run up to the Icelandic president, and they know that him and the father has played soccer together and these kinds of things, so that the German president was a bit envious after the visit, how easy it can be and how nice with the people. And I think this people thing is so important. So of course, then everyone thinks, how should that be possible in Germany? But the level of communities, cities, communities, the system that we have with neighbors, with mayors, so that where action takes place, where these few 10,000 people are in reach and one knows each other, is an essential sphere for humans to take decisions and pull them through. And we should not forget that. So in my belief, okay, I'm a deep sea and polar researcher, is research about landscapes without humans, but I learn from others. And I learn that this sphere of humans that you can reach, where you can talk in private, also help to get rid of blockades, that is essential. And we need to have more power in the cities and communities to reach the transformation. That's what I think we can learn from you.
And very interesting that you said, like, it's also this element of independent which created this momentum. Maybe that's also something for us to learn, that while climate catastrophe might be the main driver, it might not, in marketing terms, maybe not the best term. And I'm just wondering if maybe this element of self-sufficiency, independence, could also help to accelerate the momentum. What do you think, Antje?
Well, I of course look at Europe, and you're very interconnected, and that for us is also very admirable. So I was mainly talking into the past and what our past decision sort of like pushed us towards being more courageous and sort of like standing a little bit taller, maybe. If you look at Europe now, if you look at even in Iceland, I think interconnection is hugely important. Of course, low temperature use of heat is very local, but then if you're talking about the electricity to the grid, it needs to be really interconnected to work, especially if you're thinking about fully renewable grid. We have as said, fully renewable grid in Iceland, and there we have some struggles. We're a single grid, we are connected, but there are still some difficulties transporting energy between systems, which leads to waste, because some of our hydro dams are just spilling water over because we cannot move the energy between sites. So I really believe in interconnectedness, and that this is sort of like a joint venture to go into this green future. But for local municipalities taking decision on how to heat or cool your houses for the future, I think that you should always think about sort of like, what is your local resources, what can you use? And that I think is very sort of like sustainable for the future. It's sort of like, think long term, act now, and the gain is also long term.
So I listened carefully this morning with the panel on geothermal energies, and I heard that some in the room were sighing when it became so obvious that we have potential, but no one is investing. And I find that's the most important point. For the energy transition, the question which companies are actually investing has been key. And in Germany, it was in great parts the old fossil fuel industry that are important in the market, of course. So we discussed this recently at the conference. Who will it be in Germany for geothermal? Does it have to be the government, in parts most likely, but which companies will it be? Which are the investors? Can they be totally new? Is it something that comes from the finance market that is simply organized by finance investment, where there's not even a company really behind it? It's a key question for that, and also for the future of other energies that we have, and it must be discussed. And I think for geothermal it's not clear, right? That's the key barrier we have, and that we have to solve. How was it in Iceland? Was it totally the government, or was it startup companies that even maybe from researchers that did the first steps?
I think the main source of money came from the government, because of course local farmers had started to utilize heat. For example, my grandmother and grandfather, they had sort of like a geothermal hot spring very near, so they just took the heat and put it into their house. And imagine in Iceland, which is many times, I will not say always, a rather cold and dreary weather, the change in life conditions to have heat in your apartments and a heat source that is sort of like almost abundant. You didn't have to switch it off. So, and of course my grandparents, they had 11 children, so good heat, many children. So it was a game changer also for our nation, sort of like in living conditions, because living in a damp housing is not good. But I'm totally off track here, but that's okay. That's okay.
I'm just fantasizing of the 11 kids in the hot sulfur ponds.
Yes. But that was sort of like a game changer for that generation, and now we need to take that knowledge to make the changes for our future. But it was mainly governmental money that went into it, and it was sort of like some part of a fund that realized that not all of the wells that we were drilling were going to pay off. So if it paid off, you will, pay off the loan for a very long time. If it didn't pay off, the small municipality didn't sit up, with a huge debt. So it was the common sort of like responsibility of all of us to finance it. And I think that was sort of like key to doing that. And for now to find new finance into these rather risky, because geothermal exploration is always, you have great scientists, but then, you drill the well and sort of like, it's not always what you thought was down there, but, so you need finance that is rather tolerant and thinking about the long-term gain.
Yeah, and it shouldn't be a matter of money when you look up the numbers. You know that better, right? But it is something in the 200 billion altogether, what I learned for exploration plus the real business case. And if you compare that to other businesses, that is just in the framework of any company's reach. So it is awkward. And then it has to do again with politics and humans when you think about it, that it still doesn't work, even though it is a good business. In theory, could be a good business model. And it was mentioned also by the early panel this morning that it gets confused. The geothermal, the drilling that you need to do gets confused with fracking. And what I find the most disturbing is that we are actually in Germany thinking that way, that not in our backyard, so not on German grounds, not even in the sea, but the gas that we buy is really fracked gas. And that doesn't matter. So to overcome such strange rationales needs a lot of training and education, and then it's too slow, because to wait for the next generation, which may have lost this idea, or change, that is another 30 years that we don't have. So I cannot imagine that we get on, except that someone invests in really a lot of communication and marketing of an idea that paves the way for a better future.
Well, and also just social acceptance is sort of like a very curious phenomenon, because Landsvirkjun has been building power station for over 65 years. And we just recently did a survey of what the Icelanders think of our how the power station have affected the community, sort of like affected Iceland. And over 76% think that our power generation is very beneficial to the community. And because in many of our projects, it has been highly, sort of especially regarding the big dams, highly controversial, and big words have fallen. It's been sort of like, you're dividing the community and this will never heal. But then we did a survey also for the local people near our power stations, and the sort of like acceptance rate, or that people thought that this power was beneficial for the community, was 78 to 85%. That was for this. And then we asked, do you want, or are you thinking that are you positive towards us going to have more renewable energy? And there we also have a very high acceptance rate. So about 63%, and even a little bit higher if you say new energy just goes into the energy shift, sort of like from oil to renewables. So we can see it that the general public is more positive than we expected. And that is, I think, also very important to have in mind.
Yeah. But I guess the benefits that were at hand, or you could experience the benefits on a relatively short time scale. Because in Germany, I think I give a climate talk like almost every week, and very often the question of people is, not the majority, but there's always someone who asks, like, why all the fuss if we are so few people in Germany and we don't matter on the total CO2 emission? And so, of course, for Iceland, you could say that even more.
Try that discussion in Iceland, yes.
So what is your answer if a Icelandic fisherman comes up to you and say, why should I revert to methanol or hydrogen on my ship and do that investment if it doesn't matter compared to all the Chinese fisheries or so?
Well, I think that our government has, with its stating the goal of being without use of fossil fuel in 2040, put some kind of a fire inside the nation as a whole. And I'm not sure if I'm supposed to say this, but being the first to do it was also sort of like we wanted to be the first. So I think we have drawn a little bit of a momentum that we want to be in the forefront of this change. And I think that if we cannot do it, then I think that it will be very, very difficult for other nations to get to that point. So it is a little bit of putting the spirit of, Germany, very good in soccer. You know, where do you get that feeling from the nation to strive to be the best in this?
Well, soccer is maybe not the perfect topic in Germany currently. I always think, like, how can a community of the size of the city of Wuppertal can up with a football team which then can beat the English team in the quarters? So, but football topic would be maybe something for lunch or tonight. But I found it very interesting what you also said was about this acceptance rate, because Robert Habeck also said, like, that's one of the big discussions obviously we have in Germany, like all the renewable sources we would be able to have, they face a lot of, like, this NIMBY protest, not in my backyard. Do you experience in Iceland that this and I remember, like, if you take the big aluminium smelters which were located in Iceland, they created a lot of discussions as well. Do you expect such a debate to run differently when it is about, replacing oil imports and getting finally reaching this target? Does it make a difference, or would you then you could also argue, like, when you produce aluminium in Iceland, for example, is a way of exporting your renewable energy and letting others contribute from it. Do you expect that would make a difference for the public opinion, whether you would set up, for example, now a methanol plant for substituting gasoline imports, or is it?
Well, the numbers shows that is not such a big difference, but people believe in that you need new, more clean energy produced in Iceland. And I was just the Confederation of Icelandic Entrepreneurs joined up with the Ministry of finding some solutions or making a roadmap on how to be climate neutral, and we made 332 proposal of how to do that. So I think that you can say that we have joined together in that this is important, and of all the different industries that we're talking in this panel, the renewable energy, we need more renewable energy, was sort of like a word that came up, every 3 or 5 minutes. So it shows us that it's not just important for us, it's important for all the other sectors to change their sort of like path towards a climate neutral future, is that they have the use of more renewable energy. However, we know that when we come into the local community, where we want to have the new power plant, where we have to have the new dam, where we want to have the new windmills, there will be opposition. They will ask, why here, why not somewhere else? This sort of like, I grew up here. So there's a lot of emotional ties. Like Habeck told about the windmills here in Germany. You know, this is not the landscape that you grew up with. But however, I think that for the sort of like the common good and with good discussion and very open and honest discussions, we will get there and we will get more acceptance also from the local people. And one thing about that is you need to make sure that the revenues that are being made from making energy, that it sits also with the local communities. You cannot just move all the energy away, and that you cannot have the feeling that there's nothing left behind.
So the windmill debate I'm following, the windmill debate is of course tough because it is about nature also and bird diversity and also about tourists. And tourism has become, I think, maybe the biggest business. It goes, I think, beyond fisheries almost, or is equal in pair. And so fisheries that depends on ships with diesel, and tourism that depends on planes with kerosene, they are hard, of course, to get carbon neutral. What's your idea about the flying? That matters to a lot of Germans, actually. Can I fly or not? And the whole debate of fly shame and all whatnot has also not resulted in a very good feeling about the future, though there is potential with biokerosene and other matters that the chemical side of energy needs can also be tackled. And my second question also that has to do with that is, where are you with coupling heat and hydrogen?
Well, well, at least if we talk about international flights, we know that we have an international sort of like obligations, and we want to get to a certain place. However, we know that technologically we are not there yet. Therefore, it is extremely important for a country like Iceland that is basically you need to arrive with flight. That when you come into Iceland, that the infrastructure is green, so that the rental cars that you get will be, you know, using electricity. The buses will use electricity and so forth. So that would sort of like, you will at least do as much as you can for that. I have, just for the last 3 to 5 years, I think that the technological changes in both in flight and also in big vehicles, things that we didn't expect to come so soon, they're happening much faster than we anticipated. But of course, we are also thinking about producing e-fuels. But we know also that we need to, at the same time, produce the energy carrier, you know, where you're going to keep it, and then we need the consumer. So, and this is something that you need to do all at the same time. So it's a difficult task, and I think when you talk about these new systems that you have to set in place in a very short time, then the cooperation is so important. And just this direct dialogue with people, very short connection lines, is extremely important if we want to do this. So that's why it's important that we we use the first names, because in this struggle, you know, we are all brothers and sisters here.
Yeah. What I found very interesting in these two debates, that when you talk in Germany, you have this, then energy consumption is even often perceived as something very negative. I mean, consumption is not the physical right term, but, you know, using energy. While I never experienced this in Iceland. I mean, you have to debate whether, for example, what you said, we would replace fossil fuel, but it is always about, you know, energy is something which, as you said, like you just gave this example. Like, could you imagine what the difference is, like having in the cold weather a heated home, like where the positive effects of energy are always emphasized. And I think when I was teaching energy economics, one of the things I remember is always like the human being can create 1 kilowatt hour a day. That's more or less like the work you can do. And And if you look at the final energy consumption in Germany, for example, it's 100 kilowatt hours per capita per day. So basically all the history of our economic development has been of, you know, using more energy and creating value from it. And so by leveraging by factor 100. And but still today, these 80% of these 100 kilowatt hours, 80 kilowatt hours are still fossil in Germany. So there's a huge debate, you're aware of this, like, is this compatible, like migrating to renewable energy sources, while at the same time keeping this economic prosperity, which we gained by using all this abundant, cheap fossil energy. And I found it so interesting that Iceland seemed to be a good example, asking a question in a moment, who could provide a positive narrative that you can combine the two things as well, renewables. But do you think we have to more openly debate this kind of trade-offs between energy uses or prosperity, or is it rather about creating a kind of positive vision as Iceland could provide?
Well, yeah, there's lots of research going into that, and always trying to find out where are simple hacks in which you can be more sufficient or reduce energy consumption. Of course, there are loads of hacks. Our own data show when during the last winter, everyone believed in this idea of energy shortage and black stuff and so on. We are managing altogether 20% gas consumption reduction. A lot of it was carried by industry that stopped producing fertilizer, but also the households saved some 10 to 15, 20% by just cooling the houses more. And by these small social experiments, you understand the linkages between consumption and how far you will go. I mean, sitting in offices and at home at 19 degrees feels uncomfortable, that's it. And it doesn't have to be that way, but it's good to know. We have, of course, giant consumptions in the whole question of storage, cooling, freezing, especially with our food, and it's amazing how the Germans have refrigerators in their homes. I remember the worst ever incentivized program to get to climate-friendly refrigerators was when the state paid for them. For the conversion, and then every family kept their old one and added the new one, and the old one went to the cellar to store even more food at home. And of course we have, and then the energy consumption increased by far with an invested national program. So these crazy things you can look at, and we can study this much better today, simulate it. But one thing is clear, and Robert Habeck said it very clearly, there is no evidence for us spending less energy. You can maybe debate 10% if you are really great with new inventions, or 20%, but you don't get anywhere by just saving energy, and that is the sad news. And also we have this challenge that we shouldn't forget that half of the energy need that we have is chemical. So otherwise it is, we're getting rid of the fertilizer, chemical industry, the steel industry, so it is challenging. But in that, it is not a matter of the technology that is missing, it is not a matter of the business models, it's a matter of the incentivizing of renewable energies and stopping the subvention of fossil energies, which is still full up and running. The funding that we discuss, that we need for investment in new technologies like geothermal, it is all sitting there, but it's currently put into coal and oil and gas. And so if we end subvention, but take care of cheap energy by reverse subvention, then everything will happen. It's really a political, economical discussion, as your minister said, and as you said in the beginning as well.
Well, for us, I think, I know energy saving is also important. I spent most of my career in the environmental field, and then using less is just the first step that you do, because that is sort of like, it should be common sense, but it of course is not. But I think that should always be the first goal. And for us in Iceland, we have had abundance of energy, and maybe not enough care for it. Sort of because we had so much, we didn't really think that we needed to save it. And I think that is just sort of like as inherently wrong, because if there is a value, you should use it well. So For us, it's sort of like if it's too hot inside your house, you will just open a window. You will not, turn down the meter. But this is something that we need to change, and we need to be proud of it. For today, we are a little bit too proud of being wasteful, sort of like letting our houses being too hot or using the water too much and so forth. So we need to change that in our mentality also, to use well and save energy. So for us, that is also important. But I picked up on your quote on an initiative from the government to save energy. And I think it's really also important to talk about these initiatives that failed. Because we are doing lots of projects. Some are a huge success and we talk about them and we applaud them. Others are not. And I think that we need to also to talk about them because we need to learn from our mistakes. They did it, I think, in Denmark. They gave people incentives to go from for better technology regarding their sort of like heating ovens, sort of like to reduce black carbon. What happened? Well, they just bought more ovens. So the size of the problem was the same because they just they had more. So there's a huge need to always think about the core values first, sort of like use less and use wisely.
I think another key learning is, of course, to remember that it is sometimes good to let go of things. Of course, Robert is no longer here, but sometimes you have to let go of things if you notice that they would be right. I'm not talking the pumps, I'm talking, for example, tempo limits on our streets. That's the other key German thing, that we want to have free speed on all autobahns, which is of an exceptional extra energy use. It hurts a lot of people. It is dangerous. It also produces huge amounts of plastic particles in the air from the wires and everything. And so the wheels. So why do we do it? It is connected to a deep spirit of freedom, apparently. No one knows why exactly. It's like weapons in the US. You can just burn your idea of becoming president if you touch it too hard. And the same is it with this temperature limit. And so for a politician today, it becomes so important to be advised when is the time to pull it through and bring everyone up against you, and when is it wise not to go into the arena of fighting with everyone, even though you have the full right, it is fully scientifically backed up and socially and health fully backed up, that it would be really wise of us not speeding above 130. But you will not be voted if you stand up for it. And so that is really a hard lesson to exercise that, to know when do you go and fight as a politician, and when do you give up your beliefs, because you just will lose the people. I find that the hardest, and that's why I have respect for politicians, because they have to decide on these matters almost every day.
Yeah, and I think now with the last 5 minutes we are back to this question of acceptancy and momentum in the society, and I think that it was a good hint, like there are some things which are right, but sometimes just too dangerous to touch. But I mean, given that, well, the initial question was like, how do we recreate the momentum? I mean, I've been in energy sector now for 20 years. I felt like 10, 15 years ago, there was a huge momentum, like everybody was talking about renewables, and the first windmills were built in Germany, at least. And so there was a kind of, Aufbruchstimmung. You know, everybody wanted to start doing something. A lot of new startups were coming. It feels like we have somehow lost this momentum, and in many debates, it's more about, oh, this is not working, and this is a challenge, and this is a problem, and maybe we should rather stick to where we are. And maybe a bit like the discussion you mentioned when you were talking about geothermal heating, that people said, well, we know gas and coal heating, maybe that's the one, it's playing safe and stay which we are. And that now, in a moment where many more technology options are available, we should be rather have more opportunities now to do something than less. But still, it somehow feels we are getting less and less traction in the and less momentum. What could be a way, or what's the methods you think we need to more actively push out in order to regain this momentum?
this idea of us is non-factual. So when you look at the progress with renewables in Europe and Germany especially, it has never been that fast now. If you look at the European Fit for 55 Green Deal, the CO2 pricing emission trade, it is the most efficient and ambitious package that we have, and it starts working. And so, and if you see on an international level, even there, when sometimes we are so sad, I just come from the Antarctic Treaty meeting where again we couldn't agree to protect the emperor penguin, which is nonsense. But there you also have this impression of us humans failing as a multinational society. But when you look at it, there is even an agreement of China to no longer invest in coal industry outside of China. There is a reduction in their building speed and usage. I mean, so there are things, and India is probably the place where things will be decided in the future, because it's not known how India will behave as a whole. But altogether, at least for Europe and Europe's neighbors, we can say that never ever have we been in such a progressive, transformative spirit. But unfortunately, you always tell us the story of failing, which is sad.
So we need much more optimism. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we have, I think, everybody into the idea of a climate neutral 2050. We know the road ahead to 2040, what have to be done by 2030. And I think that generally people believe in the future where we are climate neutral, we will have less emissions. I think that the living standard will be even better, but the road there means changing our habits, the way we do it today. And that is, of course, something that is a little bit more difficult to get across. But I think that we need to have having in mind very clear goal for the future, and always talking about this future that we want, and never stop doing that. The problem with knowledge and fact is that people are generally not very moved by it. And as we talked about this morning, you have the greatest paper and you are completely correct, but it doesn't really matter if it's in a drawer. You need to get the information out there. You need to get people behind you. You need to get the decision makers to change their mind. So for me, it's a little bit about that the certainty is hard to get, but you need to change fast. So for us, I think courage is an important theme that we need to discuss. How to take decision without having 100% knowledge. And there we should maybe talk a little bit more together. So because we Icelanders are a little bit famous for the sentence it will sort itself out. You just take a decision and it will probably work. You're more accurate. So I think we should join forces, because both traits are important. You cannot wait for 100% certainty to change. However, you should not always just, it will sort itself out. So a balance is really good.
But I would like to end, if I may, with this, what I started out with. Not far from here in Hamburg is a fantastic exhibition of one of my most favorite photographers, Magnus Axelsson. Maria has brought us together. We have worked together about melting landscapes, the melting cryosphere. And if you time and you look at his pictures of 40 years of people living in ice that are losing everything, you will be touched. And so as a scientist, I've decided I'll put together the data that I have, but also the knowledge of the environment. And it's not so far away. And if you go to Iceland and if you see how you have put a glacier to the cemetery, school kids take tourists and show them what they measure every year, how the glaciers retreat, how the landscape is deserted. We have to say that we know already that some of the fish will no longer be there in the lifetime of the children because the ocean is too warm and acidified. They are moving the fish. And so I would like to encourage everyone who has a question, just go to Iceland and look what we do to nature. Thank you.
Kristín, Linda, Antje, thank you very much. That was very much food for thought for me. I think a very positive optimism at the end with Thetaretast. And yeah, hopefully in this spirit, the whole day will continue to create these alliances and these cooperations. And thank you very much for your time.